Welcome to the 13th meeting of the Bills Committee. Please invite the administration to join us.
好快啊！入緊嚟嘅居然。OK， 我哋歡迎
We welcome officials from the Constitutional Amendment Affairs, from the Education Bureau, the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau, as well as the D.J. We completed the scrutiny of clauses 7 and 8 at the last meeting. May I invite Ms. Cordelia Lam to introduce Clause 9 to us. And members who would like to ask questions, press the request to speak button. Ms. Lam, thank you. Clause 9, inclusion in primary and secondary education, that is equivalent to Clause 11 of the National Law 9.1. The Secretary for Education must give directions for the inclusion of the national anthem in primary education and secondary education. A, to enable the students to learn to sing the national anthem, and B, to educate the students on the history and spirit of the national anthem, and 2, on the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem. And Clause 2 is the primary education and secondary education meaning. Will members who intend to ask questions, please press the request to speak button. Mr. Gary Fan, 4 minutes. Thank you. Clause 9 requires the Education Bureau to include or to give directions for the inclusion of the national anthem in primary education, secondary education, and to enable the students to learn to sing the national anthem and to educate the students on the history and spirit and the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem. However, in primary and secondary schools, there are students with special education needs, SEN students with listening, with hearing and visual impairments, and there may be students with physical disabilities on wheelchair as well. And on such occasions, it will be difficult for them to stand and sing solemnly, not to mention play the national anthem. So they won't be able to fulfill the requirements here, even though teachers might have already taught them. SEN students will find it difficult to sing the national anthem. And for ethnic minority students, they may not have a good proficiency of Cantonese. And if you require them to sing in Putonghua, it would be difficult to sing the whole national anthem completely. So if there are really students that cannot play or sing the national anthem, the SEN students, the ethnic minority students, then what will happen to the directions given by the S4E? Will CMAB have additional directions for schools to tackle special circumstances? So apart from directions from the EB, would there be other directions? Mr. Nip, Mr. Fan's question contains 2 parts. First, people with physical disabilities or for whatever reasons they cannot comply with the etiquette for playing and singing the NA. As I said, this is just clause to give directions. It's okay if they cannot stand solemnly because of physical limitations. And then on 9.1 is in fact for the as for E to follow. As for E has to give directions for the inclusion of NA in primary education and secondary education. So the requirement is on the as for E. And if there are schools that have students that have learning issues, then it is for the EB to deal with. Under Secretary for Education, Clause 9 doesn't specify how students should be taught by schools. So Clause 9 hopes that schools can provide the opportunity for students to learn the NA, and respect is the underlying principle. So regardless of the learning difficulties, the learning opportunities will be provided. Mr. Gary Fan. But after the bill is enacted, there will be criminal offenses and penalties, and there are clauses with no penalties, but there are conduct that regarded as misuse of national anthem. Now, for primary and secondary school children, they may still be they may be cheeky, they may be immature, and then if EM students cannot understand or learn how to sing the NA, will there be controversies? So I hope the EB or the CMAB can provide more specific directions to help them to allay their concerns and to avoid controversies associated with Clause 9. Can you wait for your second round? Mr. Tong Li-Si. Thank you, Chairman. Respecting the NA and to defend the national dignity is a traditional requirement. So students are required to learn to sing the NA and to be educated on the history and spirit of the NA, and also the etiquette for playing and singing the NA. I think this is very proper requirement. For primary and secondary school children, well, we know that some of them may still be immature, and they may behave in a way, or because out of misunderstanding, they may behave in a way, well, because they are just playful, and they may be considered to be deliberate. They might want to challenge the authority. They want to challenge authority. They may behave in a way that cause disrespect to the NA, and this may result in a behavior or result in a scenario referred to Clause 7.2. So the schools will be left to handle such scenarios. But we're worried that the students might be regarded as having breached or committed an offense under the bill, in particular an offense under Clause 7.2 of the bill. So can the administration clarify? I'd like to know whether the directions will have clear guidelines on how to handle this situation. Well, under CAP 262 Minors Offenders Ordinance, we will not impose any criminal liability on minors under 10. And then for those between 10 and 16, there is also the, you talk about clause 10? Well, Mr. Tony Z asked whether a student would be deemed to have breached 7.2, and then there is a presumption for reversing the charge for those between 10 and 14 years old. So I think there should be sufficient safeguards for students in schools. Now, when we see such behavior in schools, I have the impression from the secretary that or the PS that an offense has already been committed. It's just that there can be a different handling based on the age of the offender. Whether 7.2 would be violated. In our last discussion, we discussed the elements, including the intent to insult the NA. And perhaps the Undersecretary can explain how schools will handle that. Let me stress once again that schools are a place to learn and not a place for the laws to be enforced. So if there is any deviated behavior, then we will ask the schools to be lenient. Now we are discussing clause 9. As for clause 7, we're talking about any person. It's not about the management of schools. Dr. Cheng Chong Tai. It's quite clear that clause 9 targets at all decision makers and also executives of schools. Clause 9 requires the Secretary for Education to give directions for the inclusion of the NA in primary education in secondary schools. I'd like to know whether there are any document for us to see. I will respond to this point first before I defer to the Undersecretary. Clause 9 requires the SYE to give directions for inclusion of the NA in primary education and secondary education. It will be dealt with under the education mechanism. Can I defer to the Undersecretary? Upon passage of the NA bill, the SYE will issue directions, and after communication with the sector, we are now preparing the directions. We will follow our usual mechanism. It is an administrative work for us to issue directions. We would like to have document for reference. For instance, past directions or notices. Because schools are the executor in the education sector of the NA bill, there are sayings that if schools do not comply with the directions given by the SYE, then the EB will require schools to make improvements under the existing mechanism. First, we don't know what specifically the directions are. And secondly, we are not too sure about the mechanism, and that's why the sector is worried. They're worried that administratively there might be pressure to be borne by schools. So we'd like to know whether there can be documents for us to see. For both questions, that was repeatedly raised by members. I think perhaps Mr. Ip King Yuen and Mr. Alvin Young during the policy discussion stage. Can the Undersecretary reply briefly? Well, these directions are being handled under the education system, and I think the industry has full understanding of the mechanism and how directions operate. Undersecretary, all directions and notices issued by the Secretary for Education have been uploaded to our website. So if members would like to refer to those directions and notices, you can browse the website. Clause 9 requires the SYE to give directions for schools to provide learning opportunities. Schools are already doing that, and schools are very experienced in doing so. Let me be more specific. Upon passage of the bill, the SYE will have a statutory duty to give directions to schools. Now, although there is no criminal liability involved, I don't know whether such directions will be different from previous notices and directions. And should there be a controversy on how will it happen? Will someone have to report to the EB that a certain teacher in a certain school has breached the directions? And then would there be a mechanism for the EB to suggest how the school or the teacher can make improvement? I'd like to have some reference document. Mr. Ray Chen, the administration said that directions is usual practice and is already usual for schools to teach the NA. I'd like to know how it is happening. According to the Undersecretary, most schools are teaching the NA anyway. I'd like to know whether they have done so on a voluntary, out of their own initiative, or is it because you have long ago advised schools to provide opportunities for students to learn the NA. During the policy discussion stage, members said that the current system has been operating well, and now the duty of schools have been put into the statute. I'd like to know whether it is common for the responsibility to promote a certain thing to be put into the statute.
The legislation requires the Education Bureau and Secretary for Education to be the gatekeeper. Of course, there are no penalties. So if the Secretary doesn't do a proper job, will he be subject to disciplinary action? So how do we monitor how the Education Bureau issues these instructions? In the past, we had professional guidelines or rules. They would have a draft for our reference, but just now the Undersecretary said that we have to wait till the legislation is enacted before we have these guidelines. So it doesn't say how long after the bill is enacted when you will provide the guidelines. So how long will it take for a draft of these guidelines? And do I have to have one lesson in the music class in one semester to fulfill the minimum requirement, or do I have to teach the students to sing? And will there be an assessment? Will you have to check students at random to see if they can sing the national anthem, to see if you've done the job? So 4 questions. Do we have guidelines from the past, and how is it different from the present? How do you monitor the schools in doing this work? Third, when will you issue the guidelines after the legislation is enacted, and how will you assess students' learning? Well, let me repeat. On the last occasion when we discussed policy, we discussed now, Clause 9 is drafted in such a way because in our local legislation, we need to reflect the national law's intention. And we also consider the system and the situation of Hong Kong locally. So having primary, secondary schools provide instruction, this will be achieved through Clause 9. So Education Bureau will issue guidelines, and this is done according to our practice, so we can fulfill the national law requirement and also deploy our local system. So that has to be stated clearly. Well, why don't we let the Education Bureau answer? Yes, we can have Undersecretary for Education Bureau speak. Yes, first of all, how do we monitor whether the schools have done the job? Well, Education Bureau has a standing practice through school visits and assessment. This is not just limited to the curriculum. We also look into finance, personnel, management. So we do have daily. Well, you do not need to answer other material. Will you be picking students at random and see if they can sing the anthem? Well, we will provide an education opportunity, and we don't have any requirements on the teaching outcomes. My understanding of Clause 9 is to promote education, not to penalize. So, we all understand if you need to teach primary, secondary schools students, you need to provide sufficient space, and the student and teachers need to understand the learning abilities of students. So I wish to clarify promoting the national anthem in the school. The teachers have full discretion. So do we need to have random checks of students, random testing of students? I think we should look at outcome. Just like you teach students to say good morning, well, you won't pick a student at random and conduct a spot check. I don't think we will get into such nitty-gritty details. So in our guidelines, we don't want them to go overboard and be robotic in approach. So very unfortunately, in Hong Kong, we have some people who boo the national anthem, and therefore in our law we require a more comprehensive promotion. Now, you spoke for 4 minutes. Allow me to speak. We want understanding. We don't want misunderstanding. The Education Bureau and the educational professionals understand that we focus on education. It should not be robotic and dogmatic. So we do have standards for teachers and students. That is the result. So will the students be a disappointment to society and even some teachers who disrespect the national anthem? Well, that should not occur. But if it does happen, and even the teachers do not wish to teach the national anthem, then we have to look at outcome. We would like the secretary and the undersecretary to ensure, to pledge that we are looking at outcomes. Do the students live up to social expectations, or can they respect the national anthem? Now, if the students and the teachers don't respect the anthem, then we have to ask the principal, how have they done their job? So it should be mutual promotion rather than a robotic requirement. I'd like the Education Bureau to confirm that. So it's an opinion. Undersecretary, could you respond? Yes, in response to Ms. Priscilla Leung's question, our teachers are very professional. We're not concerned about people going overboard, and respect is a basic value. So schools attach a lot of importance to these values. Mr. Alvin, Chairman, I'd like Undersecretary to respond to Ms. Priscilla Leung's comments about looking at outcomes. Is this going to be the Education Bureau's standard that, let's say, if it turns out that we have some breach of Clause 7, our students, and we also have students as described in Clause 9, how will Education Bureau deal with these breaches? I've answered many times, Clause 9 does not regulate education outcomes and what it has to be. So, does that mean if students breach Clause 7, you will penalize schools? I think they have already answered that. Let's confirm it. Clause 9 deals with the school. Now, anything beyond that does not come under Clause 9. Now, Ms. Priscilla Leung said that if teachers don't want to teach the national anthem, she's very concerned about that. So does Education Bureau have any means to ensure that teachers are not unwilling to teach this? I said that respect is a basic value and a component of human integrity. So I don't think teachers will be against teaching these values. Well, we have touched upon this in our policy discussion, but I do wish to return to this. In international schools, they are covered under this legislation. So in the front line, when you're dealing with non-ethnic Chinese overseas students, how do you teach them the Chinese national anthem? Well, we had asked and answered this. Let's do it again. Well, I had said a few times the whole Clause 9 is to teach respect. The goal is to respect. So this is a basic value. So it has nothing to do with race or nationality and linguistic ability. Well, does that mean that in an international school we have overseas teachers teaching an overseas student, they need to comply with Clause 9 to teach the national anthem? To teach the Chinese national anthem? Well, which teachers will take up that job? It would be delegated by the school. They will choose qualified local teachers. Well, put simply, overseas students need to receive education in the Chinese national anthem. Well, can they opt out? They will feel that they're not Chinese nationals, they are overseas nationals. Do they have that choice? Well, similarly, if they say that they are foreigners, can I be dishonest? Can I be late? Can I not learn? Now, we understand that respect is a basic value. There should not be any exemptions. Well, I don't think everybody would agree with this analogy, but I would like to further ask the Undersecretary. This is mandatory, so even if we have overseas nationals or parents, overseas parents who feel they don't need to learn this, because we're talking about history, they feel they're not interested, do they have to learn this? The Clause 9 just says that the school needs to provide the education opportunity. It's not mandatory. They don't require them to learn it mandatorily. Well, the Undersecretary made a few points, and I wish to clarify them. First of all, learning the Chinese national anthem, it's equivalent to being honest and other basic values for foreign students. Well, that does not quite appropriate. Let's say we have children going to U.S. for short-term schooling. They are at international schools. Well, there's no problem if you want to learn the U.S. anthem. But if you don't learn, it doesn't seem to be a severe breach. It doesn't seem to be on par with honesty and other human values. So the Undersecretary perhaps needs to refine her statement. I'm not saying international students should not learn our national anthem, the learning method or purpose might be different. So on this point, on international schools, Clause 9, just now the Undersecretary said that the spirit of Clause 9 is respect. But if you look at the wording of Clause 9, you don't find the words respect, but in the clause itself, it says they have to learn and sing, and there has to be some the history, the etiquette of singing the national anthem that has to be learned. Now we see that clearly in the wording. Now if international schools, if we have foreigners and their children in the international schools, will there be any difference in the guidelines? And also local students in international schools, they are local people. Will they have different expectations? Is it similar or different? I'd like the government to answer. Undersecretary? Well, regarding the first suggestion, I want to highlight the national anthem legislation, or Clause 9, included in primary and secondary education. This is an education opportunity, and the ultimate aim is to teach respect. The second question, Clause 9 provides an education opportunity. Now, there's no requirement on education outcome, so your concerns do not exist. Well, of course, you're providing an education opportunity, but if you look at Clause 9, 1A and B, and also subclauses, and there are further requirements. It's not just a cursory introduction. It talks about the history, the spirit, and etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem. Well, I think for the meaning of the national anthem is different to different nationalities. So the history and the spirit are different for different national anthems. So will it be different from the way we teach our Chinese national anthem? So could the Undersecretary elaborate a bit more? Oh, Undersecretary? Well, just now Mr. Yip mentioned that Clause 9 doesn't mention respect. Well, but if you look at the wording of Clause 9, there are two aspects. It's to educate the students to the history and spirit of the national anthem, and also how to play and sing the national anthem, the etiquette. So in Part 2, we say that we do mention the spirit is respect. Yes, I fully understand that. Undersecretary, could you answer briefly? Local students and overseas students, is there any difference? Well, Clause 9 provides an education opportunity. It doesn't say that they have to learn it to what extent. Mr. Hui Jifeng, I'll state my suggestion first. Well, promoting national anthem in primary and secondary education, I think this is brainwashing and prosecution. That is, they don't need to exercise critical thinking. They don't have to consider the right or wrong, and they are spoon-fed that everything is good. So what is the meaning? I have queries. So whether you respect the country or not, it depends on how much freedom and achievements are achieved. So the education secretary has to provide instructions to schools. The schools have to provide an education environment, and they teach certain content. So these instructions, is it a statutory duty? First of all, I disagree with the legislator saying that an opportunity to learn the national anthem is a brainwashing, because Clause 9 tells students need to understand the history and spirit of the national anthem and learn the etiquette. So in our education, it gives an opportunity to learn the background comprehensively. And after we legislate the national law ordinance, we will fulfill our constitutional duty. Now, you also need to answer whether this is a statutory duty. So, the instructions itself, when it is delivered to the schools, is it a statutory duty to teach this? No. If it's not, then if some schools object and don't teach the anthem, what outcomes are there? My understanding is that there's no legal outcome. Well, I answered this before. The requirement of Clause 9 requires the Secretary for Education to issue instructions. The authority and status, it's based on our education system. I'll have Undersecretary. You just have to answer, are there any legal outcomes? Well, I want to state the current situation. All the national anthem curriculum has been in existence all along. And so there's no legal outcome, even though you haven't answered me directly. Is my understanding correct? You can point it out if I'm incorrect. So there's no legal outcome. There's no mandatory procedure or penalty. Is that correct? Well, the clause itself is quite clear. Well, for example, teaching activities in the school will be assessed professionally rather than from a legal perspective. So you have not answered whether I have understood the legislation correctly or not. So if you can't answer directly, well, if my understanding is correct of Clause 9, there's no statutory duty, there's no mandatory implementation, there's no legal liability, then Clause 9, is it the same as previous clauses? They are just guidelines. Is it of a guideline nature? Clause 9 requires the schools to provide an education opportunity to students. Is it just a guideline? Secretary, I have answered many times. I don't know. Clause 9, the legal liability requires the Secretary for Education, he has to issue the instructions. The answer is very clear.
So it is not a guideline. I'm just asking you whether this is only a guideline. Time is up. Next round, I'd like to tell everyone to be clear of what is stated in Clause 9. The only legal responsibility here lies with the Secretary for Education. And the Secretary has already given you a response. So for the Secretary for Education, this is not merely a guideline. Am I correct? Well, of course not. My response is very clear. The Secretary for Education has a legal responsibility to issue guidelines. That's what I said. Mr. Kwong Junyu, well, we now have the National Anthem Bill, so it raises concerns in society whether you're trying to brainwash our students. You have to make this very clear to everyone, because right now we are scrutinizing the National Anthem Bill, and in case schools do not follow these instructions, and if students do not respect the national anthem, what would happen? We are concerned that would that actually affect the autonomy of schools. Past reports have shown that Basic Law 136 and 137 said that the schools can possess their own autonomy, and that they can have their own policies. Therefore, you need to address the concerns of members to what extent the impact will be. Mr. Ted Ho just now asked what would happen if schools do not follow the guidelines, and I'm also not clear whether there would be any enforcement within the schools. Well, this question has already been asked many times. Well, there has not been a very clear answer. Maybe you're just not satisfied with the answer, but the answer has already been given. Please answer this again. All along, schools in Hong Kong have autonomy in their curriculum, and we do have a mechanism that there's a committee to look into the curriculum requirements in Hong Kong. Therefore, teachers in Hong Kong will just follow the curriculum guidelines. Well, you're still not answering my question. I'm just asking. Let's say now a national anthem bill has been passed, yet the schools decide not to teach the national anthem. What would you do? Well, this answer has already been answered. The schools have the legal responsibility to teach the national anthem. They cannot take away this learning opportunity from students. Well, let's say that I judge that it is not so important. Let's say the schools do not think that it's important, and there one school that decides not to teach the national anthem. What would you do? All right. So if they do not comply with the guidelines, then what would you do? Chairman, I think there are two concepts here. First of all, the schools itself, they must observe the guidelines, and then as to how they teach, then they also have a mechanism. And thirdly, we cannot say that the schools have total autonomy, because as the Undersecretary said, there are also certain requirements that the schools must comply with. The teachers will make professional judgment on the school curriculum. Chairman, we are pursuing this subject because we do not want schools to fall into any trap or loophole. Let's say I go teach a school, I use the manner in which I think is correct, yet someone thinks that it is a way that I'm actually insulting the national anthem. Who will be the judge of that? This is a professional judgment on whether teaching is appropriate. I'm sorry, Undersecretary. I just want to know who will be making the judgment. Well, let's say I'm teaching, yet people say that we are actually insulting the national anthem. So who will decide the school is in the wrong, and what kind of penalty would they be subject to? Well, first of all, the school, within the school, they would have teachers, and they would have maybe teachers from the panel to deal with it. We do not need the Education Bureau to handle the matter. Mr. Jeremy Tam, I'd like to pursue the matter on international schools. Clause 9 talks about primary education and secondary education, which includes all international schools. When you're issuing guidelines, would you also divide up local primary schools and international primary schools? Undersecretary, no. There will not be different categories and guidelines. They would all be consistent. Would there be some sort of difficulty? Why would I say that? For many local schools, they know something about the national anthem, but in international schools, some people do not speak Chinese at all. Therefore, they do not know much about the national anthem. And with the same set of guidelines, you told us that you're only going to look at the outcome. By using the same guideline, well, I'm not sure how you would draft the guideline. Maybe you would say that, well, there should be at least one lesson within a year teaching about the national anthem. The outcome in local schools and international schools would differ. Would you based on the outcome, adjust the curriculum. Let's say for international schools, you might need to teach 10 lessons in order to achieve the same outcome. Or would you just say that one lesson is enough? So what would the criteria be for adjusting the curriculum? Under Secretary, this is only a guideline in principle. The curriculum, the teaching format will be decided by the schools. We communicate with the international schools, and they also understand that this is all out of respect. And that is also their teaching objective, to teach students to respect others. I'm not sure whether government schools are still go through the flag raising ceremony every day, or whether there is a requirement to play the national anthem. Oh, there is no such requirement now. No, maybe I wasn't quite correct in my example. Or let's say the primary school and secondary schools all teach national anthem once a year. Would that be enough? Can you tell us more about the guidelines? Is it just a guideline in principle? All right, you have to teach a national anthem. Or you make it very clear that they need to submit their syllabus and then have it approved by the Education Bureau. Can you tell us more about the contents of the curriculum and how you're going to assess the outcome? Under Secretary, well, we're going to provide an opportunity for the students to learn to sing the national anthem, to understand the history and spirit, and also to teach them on the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem. The schools will decide on how much to teach to the students, and there is no requirement on how much they need to teach the students. Would you conduct any review? Please wait for us another round because your time is up. Mr. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. (9)(1)(b) small I. We see that the government states that the Secretary for Education must give directions on the education, on the history and spirit of the national anthem. Now let me first talk about spirit. We can go back to the preamble. To enhance citizen awareness of the People's Republic of China and to promote patriotism. And so this is actually the spirit of the national anthem. Recently, at the anniversary, at one event, President Xi said that the nature of the country is to be united, and also to promote patriotism, and secondly to go along with a party. So would the teaching of the national anthem be a sort of like a repetition of what happened in 2012? You want the teachers to teach the spirit, so that means you have to be patriotic. However, according to our president, if you love the country, then you also love the party. So that sort of linked together. Well, I don't know how the guidelines will be in the future, but when teachers see these guidelines, would they think that you're actually bringing in patriotism from the mainland? Clause 9 states the spirit of the national anthem and the history of the national anthem. Being patriotic is also a positive value, and it shows that we are proud to be part of our country. Well, we do not have any regulations on what kind of teaching material the teachers will adopt. Well, my direct question is, would the spirit of the national anthem also be what is stated by President Xi, that you should be patriotic, patriotic to the country, and patriotic and loyal to the party? Well, I said that we're just going to educate the students on the history and spirit of the national anthem. As long as the teaching material is appropriate and the truth, the Education Bureau will not require schools to adopt certain materials. Well, yes, but your guidelines has not yet been prepared. We're asking whether you would penalize the schools for not following guidelines. Therefore, we do not actually have a basis for discussion because you do not have the draft of the guidelines right now. You're just saying that you're educating them on history and spirit, and you say that they have the autonomy to decide on what teaching materials. But are you going to make this clear in the guidelines? You have to make the contents clear. I think you need to ask another round so that she can answer you in the next round. Mr. Leung Yu-chong. Thank you, Chairman. We used the term give directions here. And in the afternoon, we're going to talk about the how rules on guidelines are, and then you have order, guidelines, and directions. I want to ask the Undersecretary for Education the legal significance of the term give directions. Is there any discrepancy between give directions and guidelines? Why do you choose to use the word give directions? What is the basis for that? A legal advisor, can you explain the difference? Why do you need to choose to use another word? Well, your question is clear. I would like our legal advisor to answer this question. Yes, legal advisor, please. Please turn on the microphone. Well, the term 指引 and 指示 in Chinese, well, it's really up to the context. It's really up to the context of it. Well, but usually, well, give directions or guidelines, you just understand the definition on as its literal interpretation. That it is not binding. It's just to provide a direction, a directional guideline. So there is such a consensus on the definition. Deputy Law Draftsman. Well, yes, we agree. Directions mean instructions or guidance. And it is the same interpretation as given by the legal advisor. Well, but instruction seems a bit more mandatory. Instructions mean you must do this, right? So you have to do it, or do you have a choice? Well, he's just giving you the dictionary definition. Well, yes, I'm just asking you about the significance of the term. I don't want to just look at the dictionary definition. I want to understand the meaning behind it. Mr. Pang, well, I have the same view as the legal advisor. It's not legally binding. Well, if that's the case, why do you choose the term give directions and not instruct? Or if both terms are interchangeable, then as long as we use one term, we can achieve the same outcome. So it doesn't matter which word we choose to use. We decided to use the term give directions because it has already achieved what we want to do. It seems that, well, is there actually a difference in the extent or a degree? Well, there is actually no difference because it's not legally binding. Well, what is your view? This is also my view. Well, if I request you to choose the term instruct instead of give directions, would that be all right? Well, there is no. It is not necessary because it's already the same meaning. Well, some people think that give directions, you get the option of picking whether you want to do it or not. But then instruct seems a stronger word. Perhaps you could consider changing the word so that there would be a stronger meaning behind it. Yes, we would consider. Dr. Fernando Chang. Chairman 91B2 states that should educate the students on the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem, which is already stated out in clause 2, part 2, clause 4. Well, the etiquette states that people should stand solemnly. But there are many SEN schools, and the students of these schools may not be able to stand solemnly. If you do not take solemnly out, you will see that in these SEN schools, not everyone will be able to do that. It could cause fear, misunderstanding, and maybe conflict. I am not sure whether the Education Bureau or the government need to reconsider. You want to teach the students the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem. Can you take out the words stand solemnly?
Secretary, we fully understand Dr. Fernando Zhang's views and suggestions. We have said that the etiquette under clause 4 is to stand solemnly and deport themselves with dignity is a general etiquette when the anthem is played and sung. If someone cannot stand solemnly because of physical handicap, this is fully understood. No, this is not the case. Now, in a school setting, you will say that this is what in the law, and some students can do it and some can't. And then they will discuss among themselves that, well, you failed to fulfill the etiquette, and you here said that you have to include the education on the etiquette for playing and singing for NA into primary and secondary education. You're causing unnecessary dispute. You're saying that this is required all over the world, but they're not in the law. Now, if you want to legislate on this, you should be flexible. You just require people to deport themselves in a dignified manner. I think that would include everything, regardless of the physical condition of the people concerned. You shouldn't require them to stand solemnly. You also produced an API where an elderly woman had to stand up to sing the NA. Now you are causing polarization among students. Some of them may not be able to stand. Secretary, we fully understand this. So it is all the more important in education. We are teaching the etiquette for singing the NA. It's not just about the behavior. Now, if you can stand, then you should stand solemnly. And if because of a physical limitation you can't, then it will be fully understood. I don't think you have raised a real issue. Now, the question is, you require a person to stand and deport themselves with dignity. You don't say either or. Well, Clause 9 is about teaching the students the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem, whereas Clause 4 is just general guidance on the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem, to stand solemnly and deport themselves with dignity. Dr. Elizabeth Quat. When the national anthem is being played and sung, no matter what country we're talking about, well, even in other countries, we see visitors showing respect. This is just a very basic courtesy. And then Mr. Ted Hui this morning said that to teach children or students how the history and spirit of the national anthem and the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem. And he said that this is trying to brainwash them. How can you say that because we are part of China? How can you say that teaching students the NA is brainwashing? This is unacceptable. Well, you have to stand solemnly and deport yourselves with dignity when the NA is being played and sung. This is just common sense. Well, if somebody cannot stand solemnly when the anthem is played because of a physical disability, I've never seen someone arrested because of that. So I don't think people who indisposed or cannot stand when the anthem is sung will be affected. I think legislators should be people with common sense and knowledge. I don't think they should dwell on questions that defy common sense unless they're trying to be hair splitting or filibuster or to obstruct the passage of the bill. Many members of the public are really watching our live broadcast. Can you allow me to finish? And some of them have asked how come legislators are so interesting. How come they're asking such questions? What point of order do you have? Dr. Elizabeth Quat said that members intended to filibuster by asking such questions. I think she is impugning motives on patients. I asked her to withdraw her remarks, or saying that possibly or maybe, well, this is still imputing motive. Well, she has not really a second guess. She's not second guessing anyone present. Then, but she named somebody. Yes, who? Well, she named me. She referred to my remarks about brainwashing. She was making a comment on your comment on brainwashing. You did mention brainwashing, and she was just commenting on the remarks you made. Yes, of course, you are always pro-government. Well, you ask your own party members. You have political mission. No, I didn't name you. I use you as the basis. I said the pro-government party will only, well, it's okay for you to call me a pro-government. No, I didn't name you. she named me and she used I used you as a basis. Well, she commented on your remarks about brainwashing. You called me a pro-government from the pro-government party. What's wrong with that? So you think it is shameful to be pro-government? No, Chairman. Do you think it is offensive to call you a pro-government person? Now, you said the chairman has a political mission. Well, to protect the government, you have to rule whether it is offensive to call you pro-government. Listen to me. Listen to me. You said, Chairman, you are a pro-government. You said, Chairman, you have a political mission. This is offensive. Which remark? You call that offensive. I don't think political mission is offensive. So you're going to withdraw your remarks. I will deal with your point of order later, Dr. Kiki Kwok. So are you going to withdraw such comments? Well, I criticize you that you have a political mission, and I don't think that is offensive. You don't think so? I do think so. All right. I withdraw the comments and I give way to other members. Dr. K.K. Kwok, what is your question? I think you mentioned a very important point. You asked Mr. Ted Hui to withdraw his remarks on two bases. First, he called you pro-government, and he said you have a political mission. No, he didn't say that I was pro-government. That means in this government, in this council, no one can have a political mission. But this is important. My political mission is to speak up for the people. And political mission is a very neutral term. If I have a political mission to do something, well, I have a political mission to speak out for the people. This is important. Now, in future, I cannot condemn Ted Hui. Ted Hui, do you have a political mission? He said yes. And he may say that I am offending him. You don't need to feel offended. Well, this is dangerous, Chairman. If anyone who used the term political mission and the other party will feel offended, then all chairmen can drive people out. I've already dealt with this issue. I made a demand and Ted Hui has complied. Now, it is, I respect you. Now, if everyone sitting on the taking the chair, drive people out because of that term, this is important. I asked whether being pro-government, if I call you pro-government, is that offensive? You said no. Now, if it was so, it would be a big deal because many members here are here to be pro-government. If you say political mission is offensive, this is a big deal. For instance, I represent electors in anti-West. This is a political mission. I'm given votes to be here to monitor the government. So political mission itself is neutral. Now, if no one can have a political mission, now, if I take the chair one day and I ask everyone to withdraw such remarks, if not, they will be kicked out, then this is a big deal. Any other members with point of order? Mr. Posey, if we criticize someone with a political mission, it may not be a problem. But the chairman was commenting on an accusation and interruption of Dr. Kwok's speech, and then the chairman was criticized as having the political mission to protect the government. Although the term itself is not offensive, but he was accusing the chairman of being unfair. This is offensive. Mr. Posey, are you done? Quiet, please. Silence, please. Mr. James Teo. Yes, the context is Mr. Ted Hui criticized you for being biased. Whether we talk about No, you might have made a ruling that you considered fair, but I can still call you biased. Unless you talk about unparliamentary language. Well, if something is considered unparliamentary, then it must be rather offensive. In the UK Parliament, politicians may be criticized of having betrayed its people, this and that. Well, you might have come up with a decision that you believe is fully in accordance with the rules of procedure, and people may criticize you that, and that may not be to the extent that you have to remove people or member from this council. Dr. Fernando Zhang, I heard Dr. Elizabeth Kwok naming Mr. Ted Hui, criticizing his remarks, and Dr. Kwok also said that it's common sense that for people who could not stand because of a physical condition, that so be it. And she said that it was common sense, and she said that members here should be knowledgeable, and she wondered how they could make such remarks. And she said whether they were deliberately delaying things, so very clearly it is a motive. She second guess whether people had the intention to delay matters, so she has imputed motive to members present. While she did not name names, she pointed out very clearly that somebody made such remarks, and that would be me, because immediately preceding her, I asked a question on whether to stand solemnly should be included in the bill. And there is a rule of procedure on imputing motive to members, and I think Dr. Kwok has breached a rule, and Mr. Ted Hui asked you to make a ruling. I think this is a very reasonable. I've made my ruling. Please respect Rule 44. What was your ruling? I said that she was not being offensive. She was commenting on remarks made by Mr. Ted Hui. No, I'm referring to another part of our meeting. So can you make a ruling, please? I just made a point of order. Now let's deal with the issue raised by Mr. Ted Hui first. I will give you an opportunity to speak again later in relation to another point of order you raised. Mr. Jeremy Tam, I'm going to be very quick. Well, Mr. Paul Zeh said that he was criticizing you for being biased. There was a problem. Now, Chairman, if I say that, Chairman, you are being biased, will you ask me to withdraw such remarks? If you agree to Mr. Porter's logic, then what I said would be offensive. Chairman, I think you have heard or seen such terminology or remarks in this council, but you have never asked people to withdraw such remarks in the past. You may say that I've already made a ruling. Please continue. So using the yardstick you applied just now. Now, political mission, I will not repeat what was said by other members. People called you unbiased. If you consider an insult or offensive, then this is a big deal. Because if we say in the future that you have a problem, then it would be a problem. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung, under ROP 44, the decision of the chairman shall be final. So long as you considered that is the decision, then so be it. Because last week, Mr. James To did a perfect demonstration. I asked him not to pretend to be something, and then he drove me out. Mr. Dr. Junius Ho, you have already made a ruling on the point of order by Mr. Ted Hui, and you have already made a ruling. That's okay, and I think it's time for you to get back to Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Any other points? Any other points? So regarding the point of order raised by Mr. Ted Hui and the rising issues, already made a ruling and the issue is already settled. The greatest problem is he said that I had the political mission to make biased decisions, and he has withdrawn his remarks, and I've made a ruling. I have no intention to continue to dwell on this point. Dr. Fernando Zhang, I did hear Dr. Elizabeth Quat mentioned whether it be Mr. Ted Hui or to require someone to deport themselves with dignity when the national anthem is being played, and somebody has to stand solemnly, and she said that it was common sense. When someone could not stand properly or solemnly, so be it, and she failed to understand why members had to dwell on that point, and that members should be knowledgeable, and how come they continued to labor then on that point, and when members deliberately delaying matters. And I think she has imputed motives to members. I urge Dr. Elizabeth Quat to withdraw her remarks. Well, under ROP 4015, a member shall not impute improper motives to another member. I don't think that she has done anything of this kind, and this is my ruling. Dr. Elizabeth Quat. In recent meetings, many members of the public have been watching the proceedings live, and some of them have asked me, how come this is just a simple question of common sense? How come repeatedly members have raised this at our meetings? For instance, should we require someone wheelchair bound to stand solemnly? I think this point was raised by a few members in previous meetings.
And today I've heard the same argument. I'm not targeting one particular legislator. I just want to remind everybody that there is a live broadcast, and even the public feel that there's no problem, and it's easily comprehensible, and we continue to repeat questions on this point. The public will feel that we're not scrutinizing properly. Mr. Jeremy Tam, well, Miss Elizabeth Quat spent 3 minutes and 30 seconds without dealing with Clause 9. Why can't you rule that she's speaking off topic? She did, but you just don't notice it. But the question is your 4 minutes speech time, Mr. Jeremy Tam. Please listen carefully. You're asking me a question, so please take note of my response. Now, each member, he can use the time to ask questions or to express opinion regarding the bill. I cannot say Miss Elizabeth Quat's speech, her opinion is irrelevant to Clause 9. Yes, so we understand. I want to apply this. You want to apply this style. Yes, you can ask questions or you can express your position. He did not ask you to clarify. you have some 10 plus seconds remain. Well, now I've been talking about the etiquette during singing and playing the national anthem, and Clause 9 is about teaching students etiquette. So how can you say that my speech is irrelevant to Clause 9? So from beginning to from the start, I have been dealing with Clause 9. Yes, that's why I ruled your speech is not irrelevant to Clause 9. Well, according to the same reasoning, a lot of people have watched the live broadcast. We have some audience members who are quite astute, and they have written regarding Clause 7, 8, 9. They have conducted some studies, and of course I believe different members of public, their yardsticks are different. I myself would not query why why is there a query that this scrutiny is not important? Well, it's because people have different positions and values, but now we're scrutinizing a bill. We're at a clause by clause scrutiny phase. So we are focusing on the wording. Is that the most accurate wording to express the intention? If it's to prohibit an act or to stop an act, does it yield the achieved the desired effect, or does it mistarget people who cannot comply, and it would inadvertently lead people to breach the law? So we are dealing with minute details, and we are now really looking at the wording one word by word, because you have a prohibitive act and you can act upon it. So there are 2 points I want to raise. For example, there is a government. It makes some decisions or provides some instructions, what has to be learned and what cannot be learned. So now at the legal perspective, you are instructing a government official, the Secretary for Education, it says must give directions, but there isn't the relevant offense. It doesn't list a penalty for a non-action, and this is where I'm stuck. I made the same argument regarding surveillance ordinance. If the police conduct illegal surveillance, there's no offense. But then, why is there no offense? Because if you say you need to legislate, and if you don't legislate, then you're saying, well, government officials should comply with the law. We have a national law that needs to be promulgated in Hong Kong, and it has to be written into the law. But then there's no offense. So, what is the reason? Could you explain? Thank you. The drafting, we are now enacting local laws according to the national law. And if you look at the national law, the wording says that the national law, the national anthem has to be included in primary and secondary education. And when we try to localize, we have to take into account the Hong Kong situation. So in order to incorporate education autonomy, we have placed the requirement on the shoulders of the education secretary. It's not a legal requirement. So if the government doesn't take action, there is an offense, and but there's no penalty. Well, put simply, in Hong Kong laws, we have similar cases. For example, Cap 5, the official languages ordinance, or even environmental protection. It requires officials to do certain actions, but there's no penalty. Well, but you're very strict, very draconian with the public. Well, Mr. James Toh feels that this is very draconian regarding the public. Well, we need to ensure that there is a responsible official in the principal legislation, so somebody needs to shoulder responsibility. Well, I don't understand when the public don't take a certain action that you require them to do, and you can penalize them with a few years jail sentence, but then you don't penalize government officials. You are that is double standards. Dr. Kokake. 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Well, respecting the national anthem is necessary, but I note that it is instructing the Secretary for Education. If the Secretary doesn't issue instructions, he's breaking the law. Well, that is very strange. You can instruct the Chief Executive, or you can instruct the Chief Secretary, or instruct the Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Bureau. Let's say the CE and President Xi needs to communicate, that's no problem. Well, so the Secretary for Education has to deal with education matters in Hong Kong. If he does not provide directions, he can be breaching the law. So let's say, for example, in the future, let's say someone like Dr. Elizabeth Quat, who is very patriotic, she sues the education secretary. She says, your instructions are not patriotic enough. I'll give you 2 examples. In 2012, when we were arguing about brainwashing, there was a Professor Lei Chok Fan who drafted education curriculum. He said we issued instructions, and if 3 years later the schools don't comply, we'll have to conduct inspections. Have you provided enough brainwashing curriculum? And if it's not enough, then they will be labeled as not patriotic. We also have a Loi Ming Choi, Baptist Loi Ming Choi curriculum in primary 2. When you sing the national anthem, if you're not emotional, if you're not in tears, it's insufficient. And then we have people like Dr. Elizabeth Quat who sue the education secretary, saying that your instructions are not sufficient. It's not patriotic enough. You need to love President Xi. You have to love all the figures in the central government. Then that official can be sued. Well, that is is a big problem. You cannot give people political agendas. You are now, so if the Secretary for Education cannot accomplish this political agenda, not just writing the instructions to be patriotic and to this is a dangerous precedent. This goes beyond education. The secretary is given a political judgment. So if you ask the CE, well, we know that she's deeply patriotic. So the education secretary, when he took on the job, did he know that he would have to take on political assignments? If their instructions are not patriotic enough, do they have to be susceptible to prosecution? Chairman, I'd like Dr. Quat to note that we are in the clause-by-clause scrutiny. We are now dealing with Clause 9, and Clause 9 requires the Secretary for Education to give direction to primary and secondary education to learn the national anthem. Dr. Kwok, can you allow me to finish? The Secretary for Education must give directions for primary and secondary education to learn the national anthem, to enable the students to learn to sing the national anthem, and to educate students on history, spirit, and the etiquette. So this is very clear. It is to provide directions within our education system, And our secretary is doing that every day. Well, if somebody wants to sue the Secretary for Education for not giving sufficient instructions, let's say the patriotic history is insufficient, well, Dr. Kwok, you'll have to press the button and speak on your next term. Ms. Claudia Mo? Well, I'm a bit worried whether our legal advisor or the legal draftsman, it seems that they are confusing the issue. I just want to follow up previously a question asked by Mr. Leung Yo-jong regarding directions and instructions. What's the difference? The both of them insist that this is the same. But the question is, yesterday we received the legal advisor's notice from the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance saying that our House Committee doesn't have the right to instruct to remove James Ho as chairman and have Abraham Sheck replace him. So the contention was issuing guidelines, and they said that the legal advisor from the secretary responded, the Bills Committee Chairman Prasiji, is this relevant to Clause 9? He said issue guidelines. It's not a request requiring the House Committee to issue instructions. So, Ms. Claudia Mo, could you point out where this is relevant to Clause 9? Now, I want to ask, this clause, it's in black and white. In Chinese, it says 发出指令. In English, it says directions. In Chinese, 发出指示. In English, is directions. So, very obviously, our legal advisor, the legal language says direction is of a lighter nature. Directions is more significant. It's binding, it's not 100%. But today's interpretation, our legal advisor and the government's legal draftsman say no. You might not be clear about the difference between guideline and directions. It's the same thing. Well, that is not accurate unless you're saying the legal advisor opinion is deficient. This is the letter from yesterday's event. So you want them to, what do you want them to explain? The clause or the letter you're pointing at? I don't understand why your comprehension has suffered. It has never been very high. Well, I cannot object to that. You said that yourself. You don't say that I've offended you. So I want to clarify that there's a hidden move, that in the legal language, instructions are equal to directions, and that it is binding. So if schools don't comply, then there will be school inspections and whatnot, funding and so on, implications. So I'd like the legal draftsman to respond first. Well, so you mean that they have already answered you? You want another clarification? No. I know they answered. They say that the guidelines are not legal binding, but according to this, it is legally binding. What do you mean? A legal draftsman? Coming back to Clause 9. The Secretary for Education must give directions under the mechanism. It is a requirement of the primary and secondary schools. So I'd like the legal draftsman to confirm. In Chinese, we're saying 指示, and in English, we're saying directions. It is appropriate. I agree with the Secretary. using directions to mean 即喜 in Chinese, the purpose and intention is appropriate. Mr. Jiang Chongtai. I'd like everybody to note why the principal or PTA are worried that this will become a criteria for school inspection or assessment. It would be a performance indicator. On if you look at Article 11 in the Chinese law, on Article 11 the wording says, organize students to learn and sing the national anthem, to teach them this history and spirit of the national anthem and the etiquette for playing and singing. So the difference between that and our clause 9a, so even if the Chinese National Act says organize students to learn and sing the national anthem, so they mean music lessons or certain occasions where primary, secondary schools have a responsibility to organize the students to learn and to sing and play the national anthem. But Clause 9 requires the Secretary for Education to educate the students on the etiquette for playing and singing. So this is the difference in wording, how to enable the students. So, for example, could we have an inappropriate assumption? So according to the Chinese National Anthem Act, you cannot assume they are unable to learn to sing the national. They only say that they want to organize the students. But in 9.1a, to enable the students from a political perspective, I think that is not appropriate language, because they have assumed Hong Kong students are unable. So you need to enable them. That is the English wording. But the question is, a more worrisome question is why this will become an assessment criteria, because they will assess whether the schools are unable to educate the students. So if you want to alleviate our fears, you should organize the students to learn and sing. That would be less controversial. So this is the difference in wording. Let's hear from the Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Dr. Cheng, for the question. If you look at the National Law, Article 11, and I'm quoting, the national anthem included in primary, secondary education, it should be part of the important patriotic education to organize students to learn and sing the history and spirit of the national anthem, and to organize students for playing and singing the national anthem. So it should be part of an important school curriculum. How do they do that? They organize students to learn and sing the anthem. They educate the students on the history and spirit of the national anthem. So if you look at local legislation,
and we also look into the local education and the actual circumstances in Hong Kong, we decided to, in our local legislation, have the Secretary for Education to give directions and to enable the students to learn to sing the national anthem and to educate them on the history and spirit of the national anthem and the etiquette for playing and singing. So this will reflect the national law and at the same time have it work in accordance with local legislation. Mr. Gary Fan, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the penalty. I know that sometimes teenagers are a bit rebellious and they may not stand solemnly when the national anthem is being played and sung, and therefore they may be in breach of Clause 7. My first question is, if video is taken of that and the police is called, I want to see how the Secretary for Education will take action. Would you send police to enforce this within the campus? Second question. Now that there's a young offenders ordinance, let's say someone violates a law and under the young offenders ordinance, if they're under 10, then they may not be subject to very harsh penalty, yet there may still be serious consequences. I want to know whether even if the Secretary for Education is in charge of giving directions, we are still concerned that young people may still violate the legislation and what kind of consequences they would be subject to. Secretary, well, just now I was just responding to Mr. Jie Wei-chun's question. I have said many times that behavior within the school would be dealt with by the school. However, when people outside of the school call the police, then of course the handling of the matter will be different. The police can only deal with it as deemed fit under the circumstances. Under Secretary for Education, I would like to emphasize that when this is being taught, then the teachers will try to teach the students the appropriate behavior. So when there is any breach or violation, whether the police would be called is an entirely different matter. Therefore, the school can call the police, right? If there are some patriotic people within the school campus. Clause 9 is talking about a professional teaching process. Mr. Chen Ji-chun, 3 minutes, please. Chairman, the administration keeps on emphasizing that only clause 7 and 8 brings penalty. Clause 9 is only a direction. So I want to talk about the term "so" in Chinese. The word "so" appears in clause 3 that the national anthem must be sung solemnly. When you have the word "so," it should be legally binding. Teto kept on asking whether there is a legal binding effect. That whether there is a legal consequence. Or if you say that it's not legally binding, then you shouldn't use the word "so must," because I think you should give authority instead of using the word "must," because it is not legally binding. Even if you look at clause 11 under the national law, they do not use the word "so." They said "应当," should instead of "must." So as this is a directional clause, I think the writing should be different from a one that brings penalty or consequence. Under the law, with the word "must," there must be a legal requirement. I think you should take my recommendation and use the word 應當 or 有權 instead of "so." Thank you. I think I have explained it once that in national law, if you use 應當, you have the sort of like a responsibility. But when we are trying to localize it in Hong Kong, we want the responsibility to be put on the part of Secretary for Education. When also we would not choose to use the word should. Therefore, in clause 9, the responsibility now lies with Secretary for Education in giving direction. So that is the reason we decided to give the word must. Also, well, you can say that the Secretary for Education has the responsibility or has the authority to give directions. We are actually giving the liability. The liability lies with the Secretary for Education. Mr. Ip Kin Yoon, 3 minutes, please. Well, I have a couple of questions. I just want to tell you because I'm afraid they're going to draw the line. Because sometimes I want to give my response to some of the questions raised. For example, Dr. Kwok just now argued about the wheelchair user. My understanding is that in India, there is a requirement that you must stand up to sing the national anthem, and those sitting in wheelchairs were hit by others, and so the court ultimately have to waive people with disabilities from standing up during the playing and singing of the national anthem. So I believe that we must also consider this. This is only a response given to the previous question. I'll also like to touch on guidelines and the word give directions. In my written question earlier, I asked whether how this direction is given. In accordance with the reply, it said that the circular given by the Secretary for Education is signed by the Permanent Secretary and served with the name of the Secretary. The word circular is used. It seems the Education Bureau, we use circular memorandum in giving directions. I want to see whether my understanding is correct. Undersecretary. Yes. Well, you said that it's not mandatory in the term giving directions and ZC. Or sometimes, but in the Education Bureau, sometimes you use circular, sometimes you use circular memorandum. Is there a difference between the two? For general circulars, for a circular memorandum, we think that usually it's enforced, it's mandatory. I want to know whether there is a difference between the two. Mrs. Hong, please. Let me try to address your question. Notice and circular memorandums are all general guidelines given by the Education Bureau. The difference lies in that the circular memorandum have shorter deadlines, such as competitions and events, and they would expire within a year. But for notices, it's probably a long-term thing, it's recurrent, and the notices could be used for a long time. Mr. Kwong Jian-yu. Chairman, so Chairman, actually you haven't really answered my question whether it is mandatory or not. I hope that you'll be able to answer my question briefly. Can you answer in one sentence? These are all policies. It's not an issue of compliance. Or for curriculum, usually schools will follow the guidelines. But usually for administrative procedures and policy, schools would usually follow the guidelines of the notices. I'm sorry, time is up. Please press for another round. Mr. Jeremy Tang, in clause 9, B1 states the education of the students on the history and spirit of the national anthem. and so many members have already talked about how Tian Han came up with the music of March of the Volunteers and the history of how he was put in jail. Well, this part of history is actually the history of the national anthem. Would you also, in your guidelines, give directions to the school to teach this part of history? Secretary, I think we've already discussed this in our previous description. I'll defer to the Undersecretary. Everything is up to the spirit of the national anthem, the objective of the curriculum. So I'm asking whether this is taught or not. No, there is no limitation as to what content should be included in the curriculum. The teachers will make a professional judgment on what to teach. All right. You give directions for the schools. Let's say the schools do not follow it. So what would the consequences be? Well, I think you should. I think we've answered this many times already. Why don't you just give a final answer to this question? And the Secretary, the schools should follow our guidelines. If they're not able to do it, then we would look into the operation of the school, whether it is affecting the learning of the students and the quality of teaching. We're not just going to look into one specific issue. We would look at the general curriculum of the school. Or let's say you give directions, yet the teachers do not teach it, so will not look at it independently. Well, if it affects students' learning and quality of education, the schools are responsible to the organizing groups and to parents and to the society, and that would include this legislation. Well, this is a legislation for the Secretary for Education. You've already said that the liability lies with you or lies with the Education Bureau. So you would only ask the school to be socially responsible and to teach it, but you cannot tell the school that, well, okay, you do not follow our directions, I am going to close down your school and take away and suspend your educational license. I've already said it. If it affects the quality of learning, then we could suspend the license. So that's the most serious consequence. Am I saying that? Am I correct? Well, different schools follow different procedures. What do you mean? Well, on this clause, there is no penalty. Clause 9 only requests the school to provide a learning opportunity for students. Mr. Jeremy Tam, so there is no consequence under Clause 9, but they may have some sort of enforcement under the Education Ordinance. Next, Mr. Kwang Chun Yu, 3 minutes, please. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've listened for a long time, but it still hasn't made the question clear. You tell us that there is no penalty, but we are afraid that when it is passed, then there may be different scenarios that would deal with these wordings. What happens if a school does not teach it? What will happen? Let's say a school does not teach it properly, then what would happen? Some schools may only talk about the spirit and history of the national anthem, tell about the person who wrote it, and some students may not be happy about the way it is taught, and the student lodges a complaint to the Education Bureau. Then the Education Bureau will have to handle the matter. It might lead to many other issues. Would the school really follow all the directions? And would there be any conflicts between students? We just want to know a bit clearer that it would not happen open, that you would believe in the school's autonomy and that there will be no consequences whatsoever. Well, actually, you're repeating the question, but never mind. You can answer. Well, this clause does not restrict how the national anthem is to be taught, and it does not list any consequences for the student. So, and I have emphasized many times that school is actually a learning venue, and so there would not be any consequences on the part of the students. Well, schools may use the teaching of national anthem to judge other people, or to tell about or to teach about other people or other rebellious people. Let's say parents complain to the school that they think it is inappropriate for the school to teach a national anthem this way. Would you leave the ultimate autonomy to the schools, or how would you deal with such a complaint? Would you really not intervene? Undersecretary, well, I have mentioned many times that our general principle is to teach students to respect the national anthem. The schools can choose how to teach, what to teach. That would be the decision of the school. And if there are complaints from parents, then we would use our mechanism to handle this issue. Let's take a short break right now, and we would resume at 11:05. Thank you.